Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first keynote session of Corthy 2022, Indigenous Tourism, What is it? My name is Michelle Whitford. Please join with me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which we are all calling in from today and pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And I'd like to extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting our guest speaker, Dr. Valerie Cooms, when I was doing some work with the Queensland South Native Title Services several years ago. And as soon as I heard Valerie speak at the first meeting, I knew that there was so much that I could and would, and of course did, learn from this amazing woman. Let me tell you just a snippet of the vast experience of Dr. Valerie Cooms. Valerie belongs to the Quandamooka people. Prior to joining the Commonwealth Public Service, Valerie worked as a nurse in Cunnamulla, where she joined the National Trachoma and Eye Health Program to work with none other than the amazing Professor Fred Hollows. Valerie has worked in various Commonwealth government roles, including the Department of Aboriginal Affairs Health Policy, ATSIC's Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and native title. Valerie was the founding CEO of Queensland South Native Title Services, and she served as a member of the National Native Title Tribunal. And Valerie is currently the chair of the Quandamooka Yulabaraba Registered Native Title Body Corporate, as well as Minjerribah Camping. Valerie is an adjunct professor at Griffith University, and she is also a director of Indigenous Business Australia, Aboriginal Hostels Limited, North Queensland Airport and TAFE Queensland. So, colleagues, please join me in welcoming Dr. Valerie Cooms to our virtual stage. Over to you, Valerie.
Sorry, please bear with me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Michelle, and I want to thank you for and Lisa for inviting me to deliver this address today. I would have liked to have been able to talk while there was things in the background like shots of Minjerribah camping and such, but I'm not that deadly at all of this, so please bear with me. But I did spend a lot of time on this paper because I believe trying to get to the bottom of what Indigenous tourism is a very interesting place to start. Well, the title alone has opened up a huge can of worms, and I had to undertake a considerable amount of historical research in relation to how what we now know and understand as tourism came about. Tourism has an interesting history, starting with the concept of leisure and travel. In early European history, travel was undertaken mainly by affluent people. The rapid urbanisation in England with the Industrial Revolution, which followed approximately 7,000 to 8,000 years of the domestication of animals and the cultivation of crops, enabled larger numbers of people to live more sedentary lifestyles due to the ability to store food. Trade and languages flourished during this time, as did travel and the belief that they had to explore or discover other lands and gain unlimited access to its resources. Unfortunately, wars, epidemics of disease and other matters soon emerged with the sedentary lifestyle, which is what eventually led Britain to have to find a place for its convicts. Following the Industrial Revolution, enhanced urbanisation led to mass migrations into towns and cities and heightened crime. Street lighting and police emerged as ways of protecting the property of the affluent. By the mid-1800s, railways provided not only transport, but also food and comfort to a broader base of European travellers and leisure seekers. England had expanded its colonial footprint throughout the world, following paths of early travellers or explorers to take up lands. These lands were used for the cultivation of crops, domestication of animals, mineral extraction, ports, accommodation, and met various other settler colonial political, social, economic, and cultural needs. At the time of settlement of what we now know as Australia in 1788 and the arrival of convicts and military staff, not many people were sailing from Europe or England to the colony for leisure, nor was there accommodation or services provided for people who wanted to. Aboriginal people's involvement in the tourism industry initially consisted of being photographed, and those photographs displayed in public museums and libraries throughout Europe. Many Aboriginal people, along with many other First Nations people, were also taken to Europe to be held on display in human zoos for the amusement of and examination by European people. In these zoos, Aboriginal people were also encouraged to show how boomerangs were used and mock fighting again as entertainment, examination and amusement. This continued well into the 1940s. All of this history set the scene for many people's understanding and how and what Indigenous tourism should look like, particularly on Minjerribah or North Stradbroke Island, as well as Magumpan or Moreton Island. The steady flow of convicts continued and their labour exploited to provide necessary infrastructure for the penal settlement. Grants of land to emancipated convicts were seen as a method of keeping people within the colony and encourage them to use their land to sustain themselves and contribute to the local economy. Most supplies had to be shipped from England, and the need for industry and economic development drove further exploration. The wool export industry grew rapidly and coincided with the take-up of lands, annihilation of wildlife and people, and restrictions to traditional owners' access to waters, particularly through what we now know as New South Wales before spreading across the country. Controlling the landscape and using it to cultivate crops and domesticate animals, and leaving some areas untouched for travels, leisure, and picturesque enjoyment is what we are now left with. The spread of settlement was rapid and enhanced significantly after the discovery of gold in the 1850s following the cessation of convict transportation. Free settlers arrived with the expectation that they would be given or granted some form of tenure over lands. In Brisbane, the opening up of lands in the 1840s saw local Aboriginal people push further to the margins, including those residing on missions controlled by Lutheran or Catholic denominations. Brisbane filled with settlers and expanded. Moreton Bay seems to have always been an attraction to day trippers very early in colonial history. The way in which Queensland was settled shapes our colonial experiences, but kinship, language and relationships between families throughout southeast Queensland continues today as it did prior to colonial settlement. North Stradbroke Island, as it was named, was a day trip up the Brisbane River with beautiful sands and waters, which are described as romantic and picturesque areas. These were terms used for places or locations sought after in England. Also, the health benefits of living near or bathing in the sea arguably remains a popular leisure activity amongst settler colonials to this day, perhaps escaping heavy, rapid urbanisation. As the numbers of free settlers arriving grew, so did their need for leisure and travels to the seaside, and particularly to places with picturesque locations. Dangerously close to Brisbane, North Stradbroke Island was visited and enjoyed early in Queensland's colonial history. First as a convict station, a pilot station, until settlers discovered a gap between North Stradbroke and Moreton Island, something we always knew about and have stories dating back to when the island split. A quarantine station, a leper colony, and then housed nearly 1,500 people within a benevolent asylum established in the 1860s. Day trippers arrived on Quandamooka country as soon as they had boats in Moreton Bay. My mother was a Quandamooka woman from North Stradbroke Island or Minjerribah. My maternal grandmother was not from there and had been forcibly removed from Marindown Station in remote Western Queensland in 1899 and brought to Brisbane to be trained as a domestic servant. Brisbane had grown rapidly, as mentioned, convict transportation ceased, and young white women were working in offices and factories. The expectation that settlers would enhance their social status and have access to servants saw colonial authorities force Aboriginal women to provide a cheap solution to labour shortages. Aboriginal women were removed by compulsion and sent from areas throughout Queensland to Brisbane on horseback, in horse and buggy, boats and trains to be trained as servants in the Queensland Government's Aboriginal Girls' Home. From that, they were sent out on trams and trains and to and from the houses of Brisbane settlers requiring servants, or sometimes in outback areas working on pastoral properties. The provisions of the Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act 1897 saw many Aboriginal women sent on these journeys using various forms of travel. These women were also brought together once a year for a Christmas picnic, travelling from Brisbane to North Stradbroke Island on the government steamer, the Otter. This is where and how my grandmother met my grandfather, who wrote to the Chief Protector requesting permission to marry her. Once permission was granted, she resided on North Stradbroke Island with my grandfather for the rest of her life. My grandfather's mother was a traditional owner from North Stradbroke Island. His father, however, was a German sea captain, as the story goes, perhaps Prussian, named Frederick Ruska or Frederick Haruska, whose birth was registered at the Cape of Good Hope when his parents were on their way to live here. He sailed around Moreton Bay and had 6 children with my great-grandmother, known as Elizabeth Ruska. He sailed around Queensland, the Torres Strait, and even into Northern Territory waters. My grandfather was able to gain employment using his seamanship skills and supported his family with his meagre earnings. My grandparents raised 7 children at 1 Mile, a camp set up specifically for Aboriginal people, so they could work at the Benevolent Asylum, but not reside in the township of Dunwich. Dunwich was exclusively for the non-Aboriginal staff of the asylum, including the medical superintendent. My mother told me stories of my grandparents leaving a lantern at the front of their house, which was right on the waterfront. People could see the light nighttime, and many people could be heard calling for help. And my grandmother made damper and gave them warm drinks before sending them on their way. My grandfather was often called upon to help find people in the bay as well. He also went out with his brother-in-law to St. Helena and dismantled the houses left from the penal settlement and sailed them back piece by piece to build the original houses at 1 Mile. He rowed out to a boat anchored nearby at night to ask them to take my mother to the hospital when she had broken her arm as a small child. My uncles were also called upon to take the priest to Peel Island to give an inmate last right, sometimes late at night. My grandmother's photographs provide images of white visitors coming to see her on day trips to the island. There are also photos of people who used to camp on the island. My father, a non-Aboriginal man who lived in Bulimba, built a boat, sailed to the island during World War II and met my mother. His family had migrated from Bradford in Yorkshire in the late 1800s and settled in northern and western Queensland. My father was an electrician, had a car, loved to camp and travel, fish, and enjoyed nature. So marrying a woman who could do that better than him was arguably a match made in heaven, and they remained happily married for 62 years. All of these experiences shaped my understanding of leisure and travel, but until we moved to Western Queensland when I was 7 years old, the only travel I had done was to go from Wynnum to the shops to buy food on the local bus, or to North Stradbroke Island on the boat to visit family or going fishing or hunting. When we moved to Boulia, it was a 3-day train ride, followed by a dry, dusty road trip across a totally different landscape, and one I know my mother had never seen before in her life. Around Boulia, there were travellers in cars, not many buses, no railway, but aeroplanes with flying doctors, flying dentists, flying priests, and flying explorers for minerals. By the time I returned to North Stradbroke Island in the early 1970s, the mining was firmly entrenched. Businesses everywhere providing accommodation and other services to travellers seeking leisure, or tourists, as they were called. My auntie Kath Walker used to refer to tourists as terrorists. Surfing was a popular leisure activity and still attracts many young people to the island. Holiday houses started to be built, and affluent people from Brisbane were able to purchase weekend or holiday houses on North Stradbroke Island. Some Aboriginal people were working for the mineral extraction industry, but many did not. Unemployment was high amongst Aboriginal people. The Benevolent Asylum closed following World War II after 80 years, and the service or tourist industry was the only other option to mining for Aboriginal employment. House cleaning, bar work and gardening all presented casual and sometimes longer term opportunities, but had peak seasons alongside slow seasons in winter. Arguably, travels to picturesque natural areas are still popular, but also there are those who seek wilder places. Minjerribah has good surf or surfing or diving amongst sharks, stingrays and other sea creatures, or trekking through the bush with many large and venomous snakes. Waters with octopus and stingers, scuba diving tours and whale watching are popular pastimes for visitors and tourists. And gorge walks tick off all of those boxes in terms of what tourists want, including that wildness. Maybe there is not much demand for Aboriginal tourism, and if there was, what is it that they might want to do or see? Climbing Uluru, for example, seems to be a popular leisure activity that, like feeding dolphins, really makes no sense. The objections to, firstly, the name change from Ayers Rock after someone who travelled, explored and supposedly discovered it, to its original name Uluru, and then stopping people from climbing it. Not one of Australia's better moments in history, and we can leave that one there, but this culture and privilege is firmly embedded with the knowledges and beliefs brought here with settlers. The belief that you have the right to leisure and recreation, and if you are prepared to pay, someone has to provide it. Mostly and historically, that someone is generally not First Nations people. Nevertheless, wherever you are and whatever the zoning or tenure, you are on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander land in what we now know as Australia. Disputably, tourism produces foreign domination and dependency along with environmental destruction, cultural alienation and loss of social control. It is also argued that it develops Indigenous people in the Western image. Negative impacts of tourism upon First Nations peoples are evident throughout the world. The Mohawk in Canada with a golf course proposed across sacred burial grounds, plunderings of archaeological sites, Niagara Falls being a significant cultural site. In 1919, the traditional owners over what we now know as the Grand Canyon were initially relegated to 518 hectares, and that area now attracts more than 4 million visitors every year, some in helicopters and aeroplanes into a sacred First Nation space. The lust for romantic or exotic lands continues. As mentioned, Quandamooka people's involvement in the tourism industry was not intense, although many of the employment opportunities available to Aboriginal people stem from the influx of tourists or the extraction of minerals. In 2010, Strady Camping had been placed out to tender by Redland City Council. It consisted of 8 campgrounds or holiday parks scattered across the island, 2 in Dunwich, 1 at Amity and the rest around Point Lookout. All waterfront locations with pristine beaches. It attracted many visitors, but the infrastructure required a lot of maintenance. In those days, most Point Lookout residents did not see us as much as the enemy as they did after native title was awarded on 4 July 2011. People approached Quandamooka Lands Council and the Dunwich Aboriginal Housing Cooperative to see if Quandamooka people would be interested in leasing the campgrounds, as they were concerned some southern investor would come and overdevelop it. I distinctly remember asking the cohort of non-Aboriginal people sitting there with concerned faces, and all of who resided at Point Lookout, whether they wanted to partner with us. They had no money, so both Housing and Quandamooka Land Council applied to Indigenous Business Australia, or IBA, for a partnership. Around the same time, and after about 17 years of fighting in the federal court, we gained native title over large portions of North Stradbroke Island, exclusive possession and freehold title where they don't want us, and a joint managed national park across most of the island. Native title challenges what right anyone had to take Quandamooka lands in the first place. The fact that we got native title within a Western legal system shaped and designed by them, we still get the blame, tells me a lot. By the time IBA and Redland City Council had sorted the deal to purchase Strady Camp, and we had native title. People do not and cannot understand it. Redland City Council argued that native title had been extinguished across all the campgrounds and holiday parks. Thankfully, we did not take our native title legal advice from the local government authority, and the deal had to change in terms of who paid who and where for the 30-year lease over the parks. It was also agreed that the partnership for the purchase of the campgrounds would be between Kayak, Quandamooka Yuli Baribar Aboriginal Corporation, and Indigenous Business Australia. Kayak was the body that had to be established to hold native title on behalf of Quandamooka people. We then changed the name to Minjirrabah Camping from Strady Camping, and you would swear it would have led to the decolonisation of the entire nation, but we did not have enough tall ships available to send everyone home. In terms of tourism, we own the land and waters, the accommodation and provide services, but on our terms. It is where the colonial creep becomes interesting. If any guest abuses our staff or spreads racial hatred, we are able to refuse to take their booking for the health and safety of staff and fellow guests. We are not allowed to ban them, but the racial abuse has been astounding. Indigenous Business Australia, before we bought them out, had business experts who provided sound advice, which we valued. One expert's advice, however, was that we should open up all of our cultural heritage sites for tourists to share. I replied that we already share too much, and that we are entitled to share and cordon off areas of cultural significance to us. We are self-determined native title holders, and what we open up or close off is entirely up to us. He argued that cultural heritage would or could be a unique and popular draw card. North Stradbroke Island is a popular tourist destination with no less than 60,000 tourists. It looks to me like we are already a popular draw card, and there's no need to open any more up. It's probably more of a reason to lock spaces up safely. Our elders in council agreed to many things early in the native title days when we laid out our traditional decision-making processes. Every family having a male and female elder who constitutes the elders in council for the prescribed body corporate that holds a native title on behalf of the entire clan group. The elders in council agreed to no alcohol or poker machines, trading, and of course alcohol. We have had people come in our development. We have had people come to us about development in a resort, particularly on Mugumpan, and start with poker machine trading and of course alcohol. I had one tourism expert ask how we could possibly look at fine dining without wine. And that was simple. We dropped the fine dining. They, not us, grapple with our decisions every day. Hatred and criticism continues to prevail and creates unwanted and unwelcome distractions. During COVID, Patricia Turner, the CEO of National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, arranged a Zoom meeting with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and Minister Wyatt, the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. I informed them that while we are a popular tourist destination, we are also an Aboriginal community with the majority of that population residing in Dunwich. We moved the main office and closed the campgrounds in Dunwich. We issued the vehicle access permits from offices at Point Lookout. We had Professor Grayson Small with a PhD and Masters in Public Health Administration gave us advice on how to deal with COVID. These decisions were good decisions, ones we were heavily criticised for. People watch every move we make to get early notice if we're going to go broke or close down. The wait for us to fail has lasted 10 years this year. We had a change of name when we got native title over Mugumpan. We got campgrounds on Mugumpan as well as campgrounds on North Stradbroke Island. We couldn't call Mugumpan camping Minjerribah camping, so we registered a few names. One of the names was about to expire, which prompted social media hysteria that we were going broke. Journalists phoned asking silly questions. The fact that from August 2020 to February 2021, Minjerribah camping contributed more than $25 million into the local community by its guests, not counting how much we made from selling accommodation. There will never be word in the media about that, sadly, not that we want to or expect that. We had to carefully rethink what it is we want to provide and how we can firstly attract better citizens, because we know there are good, decent people out there, even though we sometimes seem to attract the worst, and particularly within our own local community. Despite this, guests keep coming, must be the wild and picturesque landscapes. Perhaps complaints, close surveillance and scrutiny are common within the tourism industry. They certainly are in the native title space. As mentioned previously, Quandamooka history since colonisation has been about us accommodating people. Convicts, military, travellers and leisure seekers arrived, and many are great people. I like to write and research on the lives of many settlers who wrote about and worked hard to secure rights for Aboriginal people. And Duncan McNabb was a Catholic priest at Durandura Mission at Whitford. His resistance was unrelenting with the arrival of free settlers being allocated lands. He argued for rights to land ownership for mission inmates and helped local Aboriginal people apply for allocations of land. The wife of the Governor of Queensland, who suggested the state gather all the girls together from the girls' home at least once a year for a Christmas picnic, knowing they had been torn from their traditional lands and families to work in servitude to settlers in Brisbane. The relationships of these young women and our families continue today because of these people's actions and create stories for journal articles and presentations such as this. Not only does it put these women's stories into history, it also ensures they are mentioned, given many did not have their birth registered and nor could many of them read or write. We want good people to come, bring and send their children on school camps. Our focus will be on ecologically sustainable development, not too many people, families, affordable holidays and school education camps designed by Quandamooka people. We want to send these people, especially children, back to their families and communities with not only a better understanding of what Quandamooka people expect of visitors, but who they are, but also of their own expectations of what tourism is or will provide. So what is Indigenous tourism? Is it a concept within which the idea of tourism has been set from other parts of the world? Can we change that firmly entrenched expectation? In terms of leisure and destination, we have it all. We own the waters, beaches, patrol areas to keep dogs on leash to protect our wildlife. We are now the largest accommodation providers and employers on the island, but people still tell us what they want us to provide or do with them. Since awarded native title, we have focused on language reclamation. Dual signage is a part of it. Narrabudgunjara Joint Managed National Park, Quandamooka Aboriginal Land, Gunnabar Learning Centre, signs at what Cook named Point Lookout because how dangerous it was with rocks, versus our word, which is Malumba, means place of many rocks. Dr. Sandra Delaney has been working on signage throughout the island. Naming of boats, buildings and programs has become commonplace throughout kayak and will continue. Placemakers designed by Quandamooka artists is imperative also and does not seem to attract as much criticism, desecration and damage as a sign, thankfully. Reclaiming Point Lookout using dual signage can be seen as a sign of reconciliation. However, now we have had 2 signs destroyed, it seems a long way off. For schools, we will provide science and have a product designed by our maritime scientist Deb Muller and a children's education expert and artist Julie Haysom, given children's education about our lands and waters. Saltwater Marriage Galleries helped design the logo and t-shirts made for Jarja Milbinum education program. Deb researched the product and aimed it at primary schools years 4 to 6. Julie designed the activities supporting the strong messages about wildlife protection and caring for country. Dr. Sandra Delaney's Lang, we also welcome to visit our campgrounds and country and learn respect as it will be shown. We believe this is the most effective way of reconciling settler colonials in 60,000 plus years of culture. More people for profit is not our game. We're heavily criticised for reducing guest numbers even during COVID. The privilege of using Straddie as a guest zone place for leisure, health or whatever it is, of course. But how you do that will be determined by Quandamooka across the areas we can contain and control under native title. The first time we've been able to do this since colonisation. Doing it our way comes at a heavy price. Unrelenting racist or culturally incompetent journalists fed stories from privileged people about loss of access. Commercial tourism operators tell stories about us locking them out when we have not even found our way to Bunnings to purchase any locks, let alone kept them out. But we know that newspapers are about selling newspapers and racism, but native title is native title as well. Get yourselves across it, folks, as it's everywhere and it will continue to play a huge part in tourism. Uluru is the beginning of Australia coming to terms with the wonders of the world's oldest living cultures and languages. Many places will be and must be changed back to their original names. I'm told some heritage buildings on Quandamooka country have a history of incarcerating many blackbirded South Sea Island people. When brought here to cut sugarcane, think of that next time you take someone out to a visit or decide to hold a function. Does it acknowledge its past? Built with British slavery money, how can we celebrate that history without acknowledging that happened there, what happened there? Let's look at Townsville. Would Townsville ever cope or succeed after being named after one of the state's worst or best blackbirders? Not unlike the girls' home inmates, families remain intertwined. Our neighbours in sugarcane country are all linked to South Sea Island families and have become combined and on many levels. Similarly, our neighbours in the north, Gari, not Fraser Island, Gold Coast, spare a thought for the TOs there whose life changed rapidly and tourism changed their lives forever. They were smart and rapid uptake of their lands and the influx of hordes of tourists stored and kept language and cultural heritage information together, and their museum is amazing and highlights their self-determination, resilience, foresight and strength. We as Quandamooka people have learned a lot from our neighbours. If you want Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to participate in the Indigenous tourism space, whether as individual traders, community organisations, private companies or traditional owners that registered native title bodies corporate, it has to be in culturally safe space and must be on our terms. Quandamooka will and still and does too, but I think my life expectancy has been shortened by the response by settler colonial travellers seeking leisure time on my community. If you want to go to the Daintree, Western Queensland and North Stradbroke Island, respect the local traditional owners who might not want to see or hear your young people on jet skis, boats, forward drive, let alone clean up after you, and the stories we could tell, but we won't in the spirit of reconciliation. Both Spirit of the Red Sands with my favourite nephew, Boydo Ruska, and Madonna Thompson take people across her country in a unique tour like no other. How brave are they to deliver a product on their own terms and country? Traditional owners may decide to close off tracks for 4 to 5 months of the year, despite creating annoyance and fueling endless complaints. The joint management staff, when the Queensland government are driven mad, but have finally started to understand that native title rights are, particularly what native title rights are when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people own the lands and waters you wish to travel and seek leisure time on as a tourist. Also, archaeological sites have to be blocked off, and that is no one's business but traditional owners. If the site is more than 230 years old and there is a Queensland Police processor, it is our business as a prescribed body corporate, not yours. We also have a responsibility to uphold, protect everything and everyone's native title rights, includes cultural heritage. We will and have shared our lands, waters and sites and will continue to look after welcome visitors. We currently provide accommodation, do compliance, permitting and cultural heritage and native title across all Quandamooka lands and waters. This is our mandate, and if protecting current country, people and sites upsets visitors or inconvenience others, I'm terribly sorry, but it's too bad. Compliance and permitting creates conflict, and like badly behaved kids, everything is great until you say no. Some traders cannot believe that they find out they have to seek permission from Aboriginal people to conduct or access or disturb lands and expect that it will automatically be granted. If it is not, letters to local government, state government, newspapers, community meetings, and the reason given was a trader had already preempted the outcome of the permit process and purchased equipment, or resents another bureaucratic layer of scrutiny over land matters, something we know a lot about. Simply unheard of in Australian colonial history, and even the media want to talk about that one. It's to do with land, and sadly, the Australian mindset needs to be broken down, and maybe having First Nation tourism outfits might be the first case you get of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander self-determination. Who comes, who goes, where they go, how they go, look after their rubbish and clean up after them. Despite this, we encourage families and welcome children. We focus on education of children who visit. This is how Woodjaroo said to do it. As the adults, she said, were mentally constipated. So Indigenous tourism when lands, is Indigenous tourism when lands are or were colonised, functioning within capitalist economy to create work for us, providing accommodation to visitors seeking leisure on our traditional lands and waters. Even within the Western legal system, native title rights include the right to say no in some circumstances, reduce numbers of visitors and restrict access. The importance of restricting access to areas because going to Australia meets all aspects of their adventure, risk, naturalist, leisure seeking, settler colonial travellers experience. We know, we watch, we learn. Before I go, I must say a huge thank you to the Torres Strait people who fought and won against terra nullius in the High Court to enable us on Quandamooka country to get native title and have some control over who comes, how they behave for the first time since colonisation. It creates a lot of conflict and a lot of anxiety, but it is what it is and will never change. Always was, always will be. Peace to all the First Nations people whose sacred and spiritual lands and waters are inundated by settler colonials purely for their own leisure and entertainment. That is what Indigenous tourism is to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And what a shame that we can't hear the round of applause in this virtual stage that we're on at the moment. That was a really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you very much. Now, we have some greetings from the Turrbal and the Cubby Cubby people. We've got greetings from the Bindal, I hope I pronounced this one right, Wulgurakaba people from Sri Lanka. Did I say that right?
Wulgurakaba from Magnetic Island.
Well, I was way off there, wasn't I? Yeah, I'll have another go at that one later. Thank you. From Sri Lanka, the Karuna people. Yep, that's our greetings. Now, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If anyone in the audience has some questions, if you can pop them into the chat while we're waiting for that. Valerie, you spoke about the impacts of colonial creep how in the tourism industry. How do we control that at scale? So you're able to do that within Quandamooka, but how do we do that at scale when not all regions have native title and so on?
I think you would have to have people understand their own role as tourists in the colonial system. Like, what does it mean? What does it bring? What do you actually want? What do you bring to that community? I think it takes a big rethink of how we as Australians view tourism.
So is that's really going back to our education system, isn't it? And starting right from day one and learning those things so that they become part of our mindset.
Well, if you take, for example, let's just talk about Walkarooka people. Walkarooka people have come to Minjerribah for many, many years. They've come as welcome guests always. And when Quandamooka people, my son, for example, went up to Walkarooka country, that welcome extended, of course, to him. And we have respect. I wouldn't go to Walkarooka with my jet ski and humbug around or ask Walkarooka people to take me here, take me there. Whatever they take me, whatever they want to show me, that's up to them. So I don't come with that baggage or that mindset. And nor did they when they come to Australia. So I just don't understand. I don't think people have that real depth of understanding of what it means to traditional owners when people come to their land, and how people do want to welcome people and contain and control and corral people about where they go and what they do. But I had Mike, a nephew of mine, say to me the other day, they've got this brewery being built on the island. It's called the Mid-Track, and it's about a mid-track through the island. And this non-Indigenous man came up to my nephew and said, "How do you get to the Mid-Track, mate?" And my nephew said, "Well, you don't. We don't want people there." "Oh, but how do you get there?" And it's that exploration and that, we're going to go and we're going to find this land and we're going to explore it and we're going to discover it and we're going to harness it and we're going to control it. So I think there's thousands of years of that. And you have to try and, in some way, try and break that down.
Thank you. Now I have a question from Aaron Thang, and he has asked, Valerie, is there scope for Indigenous tourism to open up a new dialogue for Indigenous food cultures? And what are the opportunities and barriers or barriers to grow this market?
For the food cultures? I'm not quite sure what we're talking about with food cultures, but I'll share years ago when we used to have NAIDOC on the island, when Aunty Kath Walker was around, and we would have a big cook up at the housing co-op of traditional food. And there would be a lot of time taken to explain to people about the traditional food. And my other auntie, Auntie Lucy, Aunty Kath Walker's older sister, leaned over to me and whispered, "I told her not to tell everybody about this because then everybody will go and eat our food and there won't be any left." I thought, okay. So, and then a few months later, I saw in the Courier Mail on a Saturday, a chef had put this famous new quampies, we call them, which is a pearl shell oyster that you cook and eat, and that this was a new delicacy. So I thought, okay. So look, we had an Indigenous chef, a great Indigenous chef that we were fortunate to have working for us at the time. And what he added to the food and how he explained to our people, to the diners and the people who were eating his food was absolutely fantastic. So I'm sure there is a great market there if it's done properly by Indigenous people and for Indigenous benefit. So I can see that there would be great benefit and awareness for that, but long as we don't deplete our resources.
Okay, thank you. So that leads me into, I don't have any other questions on the board at the moment. That leads me into probably my last question. We have a few more minutes left before the end of the session. With the potential for a new market, maybe for Indigenous foods or Indigenous food cultures, how does that fit in the role of Indigenous tourism, if indeed you think there is one, as we lead up to the Olympic Games in 32? So I guess the question is, do you think that there's a role for Indigenous tourism in the lead up to the Games? And I guess Indigenous food cultures is probably part of that, if you think there is.
Yeah, I sort of like, I kind of like get what you're saying, but I think with, you talk about the Olympic Games coming up, and then you have the Paralympics, is that right, after the Olympic Games?
Yeah.
We're more interested in how we can accommodate and look after all the people that's coming for the Paralympics. We figure everybody else will be pretty much taken care of. And in doing that, in showing respect, we would share our food with them. I don't know about a different product because I think fish and chips is pretty much was on the menu long before colonisers got here, or maybe they wasn't long after that. I don't know with the history of fish and chips.
I like fish and chips.
But we don't have to encourage people to eat fish. They seem to, and they eat our prawns and they eat our crabs. They don't eat dugong, which is good, but they damage enough. So I don't know that they've been chasing our turtles either. So maybe there is some space there for us to share our cultural processes with new people, but I'm not sure about that industry part. You know, I'm not real good with all that capitalist regime stuff.
Okay. Now, thank you. I have one more question from Johan Elheim. Hi, Johan. Nice to see you. Johan has said, lots of university research is done on Indigenous tourism, however, not always including the local people as participants. How would you like us researchers to create projects that are useful for the locals firstly? And that's Johan, living on Army land, educated on, Gumbaynggirr land.
Yeah.
What's that? No, I'm not sure.
Nambucca Heads. Yeah.
Okay. Thank goodness you're here.
What did he say? What was the question again?
Lots of university research is done on Indigenous tourism, but not always including the local people as participants. How do we start these projects that are useful at the local level?
Well, what you got to do with university research is be available as researchers to do the research that Indigenous people ask you to do. Don't come in with your research expecting us to be your informants or fit into it. You can let us know that you're a researcher in relation to Indigenous tourism or tourism sector as a. So if Indigenous groups want some research done, they know where to go. Don't come in first thinking that we're going to be part of your research. We'll ask you to be part of ours. Yeah.
It's fairly simple, isn't it, really? Yes, consideration. Okay, Tamara has said outstanding keynote and thank you, and hello from our Wabakai country.
Where's that?
Tamara's down Newcastle way, so I probably haven't said that correctly. AWABAKAL.
Awabakal.
Awabakal. Okay. We definitely need more exposure to language across the country, I think. If nobody has any other questions, I think that might be it for today. It looks like we have no other questions coming up. Valerie, let me take this opportunity to thank you once again for your presentation, as always. It was fabulous. It's always great to listen and learn from you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Very much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Michelle and Valerie, for the thought-stimulating session. Next up, we have the award ceremony. I would like to invite Dr. Edmund Go to present the JHTM Best Paper and Reviewer Awards. Edmund, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Elaine. Yep, good afternoon, everyone. We trust that you're enjoying COTI 2022, and congratulations to Valerie. That was an excellent keynote. Yes, my name is Edmund, and I'm actually presenting these awards on behalf of Professor Sigala, who can't be with us today. Yep, so the COTI 2022 awards is actually a celebration of quality. Yep, of this journal. Yep, so we have a couple of awards to give out. Yep, so the editorial team of JHTM, we are pleased to announce the winner of the journal's Best Paper Award. Yep, this winning article was based on usage statistics, and out of 200 quality papers, the Best Paper Award goes to this paper titled Effects of Rural Revitalization on Rural Tourism by Jun Yang, Ru Si Yang, Min Si Chen, Qing Hui Su, Ying Zi, and Jia Chao Si. As you can see, yep, a round of virtual applause for them. Yeah, this was one of the top quality papers voted by the editorial team there. Okay. And we have two other highly commented paper awards. Yep, the two papers are, the first one is Understanding the Influence of the Perceived Risk of Coronavirus on the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorders and Revisit Intention of Hotel Guests. And this is by Yu J, Lee K, and Huiyin S. Yep, so a round of applause to them. Well done to this paper. It's very timely. And the second highly commended paper is also COVID related. Yep, the paper title is Clean Safety Message Framing as Survival Strategies for Small Independent Restaurants During COVID-19 Pandemic. And this is by Kwaji Kim, Mark Bond, Mi-hee Chu, and Kayun Hee. Yep, from University of South Korea. So well done to them. Yep. So we move on, yep, to our JHTM Top Reviewers Award. So this was based on the 2021 top reviewers, based on the number of manuscript review and the speed of the reviews, as well as the quality of the reviews by these individuals. So the best review awards goes to 3 individuals. Yep. Firstly, to Dr. Jun Wang from Edith Cowan University, Australia. The second goes to Anna Famaki from Cyprus University of Technology. And lastly, for Raymond Restagar from the University of Queensland, Australia. So well done to all 3 of them. And it wouldn't be possible to actually review so many papers without our reviewers. So it's always good to present awards to our reviewers. Yep. And lastly, yep, this next section of awards goes out to our PhD Best Paper Awards. Yep. So this category looks at our current PhD researchers or recent graduates, and they were submitted their manuscripts in 2021 to JHTM. Yeah. So all of these award winners will receive a cash prize, a certificate, and opportunities of public recognition and promotion. Yeah. From the 11 high quality papers. Yep. We have 2 winners. Yep. The first is the highly recommended PhD paper, and this is awarded to Dr. Montira Interson from the University of Otago, and her paper is titled Examining the Interplay Between a Hallmark Culture Event, Tourism, and Commercial Activities, a case study of the Songkran Festival. Yep, so well done to Dr. Interson. Yeah, and the best PhD paper goes to Mr. Ding Shi, from James Cook University, for his paper Differentiating Tourism Scam Cases Towards a Taxonomy of Deceptive Schemes. All right, so well done to both winners. So both winning papers will be given free access for JHTM from the 20th of February. Yep, and the full list of winners will be available on the Science Direct website after the conference. So there you go. All right, so once again, on behalf of JHTM, congratulations to all the winners. And we thank you for all your support to JHTM over these years. And we look forward to receiving your exciting manuscripts, in 2020 and in the future. So once again, have a nice day and take care. Back to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Edmund, and congratulations to all award winners. Next up, we have lunch break. But before we do that, I just want to walk you through the program highlights for this afternoon. So the next session will start at 1:45 Brisbane time. So that is our concurrent session 4. And just a reminder, as a fellow is on during the concurrent sessions, and I would also like to invite you to visit our sponsors during the conference as well. We have another e-poster session during the afternoon tea break at 3:45. And after that, we have the highlight of this afternoon, which is our panel session 1, Shaping the Next Norm. As you can see from the slide, we have an excellent lineup of panels. So I invite you to join us for the panel 1. Now, I believe you are earning a lot of points with the Coty Conference Challenge and winning those badges and having fun with the challenge. Do you know that you can actually earn points by connecting with other delegates on the Meeting Hub? So do take a lunch break and coffee break to connect with other delegates and attendees. And don't forget to check out today's trivia questions on the Goals tab. So we have 2 more new trivia questions. If you can't view them, you can refresh the page. If you go to your profile, the little bubble that shows your photo, if you click on it, you will see there's an option to refresh data. So if you can't see further updates that we have done to the platforms and the trivia questions, so don't forget to click on that button. Now, final slide from me, and I'm standing between you and lunch. So this one last announcement from me is don't forget to post, share, and comment on social media using the hashtag Coty2022 hashtag. You could be one of the winners of the 3 social media awards. So that will be all from me. Thank you everyone for joining our first keynote. Congratulations again to all award winners. See you later in the afternoon session.